The story of Van Halen isn't just about explosive guitar solos and stadium-shaking performances. Behind the scenes, there was a quiet bassist who held everything together, until the day he discovered he'd been written out of his own legacy. Michael Anthony is now 70 years old, and after decades of silence, he's finally speaking openly about what really happened inside one of rock's most iconic bands. What he's revealed has shocked fans worldwide and forever changed how we view the Van Halen story. Michael Anthony Sobolewski didn't grow up dreaming of rock stardom in the conventional sense. Born in Chicago in 1954, he came from a musical family where his father Walter played trumpet. Music wasn't just background noise in the Anthony household, it was a language, a form of communication that young Michael absorbed from an early age. When his family moved to Southern California in the mid-1960s, that foundation would prove invaluable. Like many musicians of his generation, Anthony started with a different instrument. He learned trumpet first, following in his father's footsteps, and even played in his school's marching band at Dana Junior High in Arcadia. But at 13, something changed. The British invasion had arrived, rock music was exploding, and the trumpet suddenly felt limiting. Anthony wanted to be part of this new sound, this rebellious energy that was transforming youth culture. Here's where Anthony's story takes an interesting turn. He didn't gravitate toward guitar like most teenagers. Instead, he recognized that every band needed a strong bass player, and good ones were harder to find. A friend loaned him a Fender Mustang guitar, and Anthony did something resourceful. He removed 2 strings and taught himself to play bass. When his father saw how serious his son was, he bought him a proper bass guitar and amplifier. That investment changed everything. Anthony studied the masters, Jack Bruce of Cream, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, Harvey Brooks. He learned to play right-handed despite being naturally left-handed, adapting to the instruments available to him. This wasn't just about learning notes and scales. Anthony was developing a musical philosophy. Be solid, be reliable, and serve the song. That philosophy would define his entire career. By the early 1970s, Anthony was playing in a local power trio called Snake. They played parties, school dances, and small clubs around Pasadena and Arcadia. Anthony handled bass and lead vocals, learning how to command a stage and connect with audiences. Snake wasn't destined for greatness, but it was the perfect training ground. More importantly, it put Anthony in the right place at the right time. The Southern California music scene was a tight-knit community. Bands knew each other, shared stages, and sometimes shared equipment. One night, Snake opened for another local band called Mammoth at Pasadena High School. Mammoth featured 2 Dutch-born brothers, Alex Van Halen on drums and Eddie Van Halen on guitar. During their set, Mammoth's PA system failed. Without hesitation, Anthony offered them Snake's equipment so the show could continue. That single act of generosity created a connection. When Mammoth's bassist Mark Stone left the band shortly afterward, the Van Halen brothers remembered the helpful bassist from Snake. They invited Anthony to jam with them in a garage. The chemistry was immediate. Anthony's solid bass work locked perfectly with Alex's powerful drumming, creating a rhythm section that gave Eddie the foundation to experiment and innovate. His high-pitched backing vocals added a dimension the band had been missing. Anthony joined Mammoth, which soon became Van Halen after discovering another band already used the Mammoth name. With David Lee Roth on vocals, the classic lineup was complete. What none of them knew was that they were about to change rock music forever, and that the friendship formed in that garage would eventually turn into one of rock's most painful betrayals. Van Halen exploded onto the scene with their 1978 debut album. Michael Anthony's bass lines on Runnin' with the Devil and Ain't Talkin' About Love provided the foundation, while his backing vocals became instantly recognizable. Those high harmonies weren't just decoration, they were essential to the Van Halen sound. Listen to any classic Van Halen track, and you'll hear Anthony's voice weaving through the mix, adding power and melody. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, Van Halen dominated. Albums like Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, Fair Warning, and Diver Down went multi-platinum. Anthony was there for all of it, playing hundreds of shows a year, recording album after album, maintaining professionalism even as tensions grew between Roth and the Van Halen brothers. According to former manager Noel Monk, in those early years, Anthony was treated as an equal partner. He received 20% of the band's income and shared equally in both profits and debts. He participated in band meetings and business decisions. On paper, he was a full member of Van Halen. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The Van Halen brothers started making decisions without consulting Anthony. Financial arrangements shifted. Anthony noticed but didn't make waves. He was loyal to the music and believed in the band's vision. He trusted his bandmates. That trust, he would later learn, was a mistake. The album 1984 represented Van Halen's commercial peak. Jump became their first and only #1 hit. Panama and Hot for Teacher dominated rock radio. The band was selling out arenas worldwide. Michael Anthony was playing to thousands of fans every night, his bass and vocals as essential as ever. But backstage, something devastating was happening. According to Noel Monk's memoir, during the 1984 tour, Anthony was presented with a contract backstage, just hours before a show. Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, and David Lee Roth, all three of his bandmates, stood over him as he was pressured to sign. The document stripped Anthony of future songwriting credits and royalties. It was retroactive, meaning it affected work he'd already completed. Anthony has spoken about this moment in various interviews over the years. He felt cornered, betrayed, but also afraid of losing everything he'd worked for. If he refused to sign, would the band continue without him? Would he be replaced before the tour ended? In that moment, facing three determined bandmates hours before showtime, Anthony signed away his rights. Think about that situation. You've spent years helping build something from nothing. You've contributed your talent, your voice, your time. You've been loyal through conflicts and challenges. And then, at the peak of success, your partners tell you that you're not entitled to what you thought was yours. That's exactly what happened to Michael Anthony. For years, Anthony didn't talk publicly about what happened. He continued playing with Van Halen through the Sammy Hagar era, which began in 1985 when Roth left. Albums like 5150, OU 812, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and Balance were huge commercial successes. Anthony's bass and vocals remained crucial to the sound, but financially and legally, he was increasingly marginalized. Industry insiders noticed the disparity. While Eddie and Alex Van Halen accumulated massive wealth and owned the Van Halen name, Anthony received a smaller share despite his contributions. He was essentially a highly paid session musician in a band he helped create. But Anthony maintained his professionalism, never bad-mouthing his bandmates in public, always focusing on the music. Why did he stay silent for so long? Anthony has explained that he loved playing music, loved the fans, and didn't want to damage the band's reputation. He also harbored hope that things might eventually be made right. That hope proved unfounded. The ultimate insult came in the mid-2000s. Eddie Van Halen decided to replace Anthony with his teenage son, Wolfgang Van Halen. According to Anthony, he didn't receive a phone call, a meeting, or even a formal notification. Instead, he discovered he'd been fired from Van Halen by reading about it on the internet. Imagine that moment. You've given decades to an organization. You've been there through personnel changes, creative shifts, and personal dramas. And you find out you've been replaced not through a conversation with people you considered friends, but through online news reports. The lack of respect was staggering. When Anthony finally opened up about this treatment, fans were outraged. Many felt that Eddie Van Halen, for all his musical genius, had shown a shocking lack of character in how he treated someone who had been loyal for over 30 years. Anthony himself has been remarkably measured in his responses, expressing hurt and disappointment rather than anger. Now in his 70s, Michael Anthony has become more candid about his Van Halen experience. He's participated in interviews and documentaries where he's discussed the contract controversy, the financial inequities, and the dismissive way he was eventually removed from the band. He's not bitter or seeking revenge. He's simply telling his story. Anthony has emphasized that he holds no ill will toward Wolfgang Van Halen, recognizing that the younger musician was simply following his father's wishes. His criticism has focused on how the business side was handled and the lack of acknowledgement for his contributions to the band's signature sound. What's striking about Anthony's revelations is how they've reframed Van Halen's legacy. Fans are now recognizing that the band's success came with a human cost. The bassist who provided the foundation, who never missed a show, who sang those distinctive harmonies on countless hits, was systematically marginalized and ultimately discarded. Michael Anthony's story forces us to reconsider what we know about Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen was undeniably one of rock's greatest guitarists, a true innovator who changed how the instrument could be played. But innovation in music doesn't excuse poor treatment of colleagues. Genius doesn't justify betrayal. Anthony's contributions to Van Halen were substantial and irreplaceable. His bass playing was never flashy, but it was always exactly what the song needed. His vocal harmonies were distinctive and essential. Listen to Van Halen albums after Anthony's departure. Something is missing, and that something is the chemistry he brought. The music industry is filled with stories of artists being exploited, of creative partnerships ending badly, of business concerns overriding friendship. Michael Anthony's story is particularly poignant because he did everything right. He was professional, loyal, and talented. And still, he was pushed aside. Today, Michael Anthony continues to play music with passion and joy. He's performed with Sammy Hagar in various projects, including Chickenfoot and The Circle. He's found success and satisfaction outside of Van Halen, proving that his talent was never dependent on that platform. He's reconnected with audiences who appreciate not just his musicianship but also his integrity. When Eddie Van Halen passed away in 2020, Anthony spoke respectfully about his former bandmate, acknowledging Eddie's genius while also noting the complicated nature of their relationship. It was a graceful response that demonstrated the character Anthony has consistently shown throughout his career. At 70, Michael Anthony's revelations aren't about settling scores, they're about setting the record straight. He wants people to understand what really happened behind the scenes, how business and ego can corrupt even successful artistic partnerships. His story serves as a cautionary tale for musicians entering band agreements and a reminder that talent and loyalty don't always guarantee fair treatment. The truth Michael Anthony has exposed isn't shocking in the sense of being scandalous, it's shocking in its ordinariness. This happens all the time in the music business. What makes Anthony's case notable is the stature of the band involved and the extent of the disparity between contribution and compensation. Van Halen's music will endure because it's genuinely great. But now, when we listen to those songs, we can hear them more completely. We can appreciate the bass lines that held everything together, the harmonies that added dimension, and the musician who provided those elements even as he was being written out of the story he helped create. Michael Anthony's exposure of how he was treated doesn't diminish Van Halen's musical legacy. It complicates it, makes it more human, and reminds us that behind every great band are real people with real feelings and real grievances. That's the truth Michael Anthony is sharing at 70, and it's a truth worth hearing.